I felt my heart shatter when my 5-year-old daughter asked casually at breakfast, "Mommy, does Daddy love you again today, or is it a bad day?" She said it so simply, like she was asking what cereal we were having. Her little fingers were playing with her spoon. Her feet swung under the kitchen table. And her voice, it was soft, innocent, like she didn't even realize what she was saying. But I did. In that moment, I stopped breathing. Not because she meant to hurt me, but because she didn't know that question should hurt at all. I stared at her. I couldn't speak. And she just kept eating her cereal, humming, waiting for an answer. Like it was the most normal thing in the world. That's when I knew. She thought this was love. This story isn't about violence or bruises. It's about something much quieter. Something more invisible. It's about the kind of pain that doesn't leave a mark on your skin, but sinks deep into your soul. The kind that confuses you, tricks you, makes you think you're the problem. And the worst part, I thought I had hidden it from her. I really did. But kids, they see everything. Before we go any further, let me take you back. Because to understand how I got here, sitting at the kitchen table with tears in my throat, you need to know how it all started. He wasn't always like this. There was a time, not that long ago, when I felt lucky to have him. Like I'd won something. He was charming, thoughtful, funny, the kind of guy who remembered your favorite candy and brought it home just because. I remember our first date like it was a movie. Rain outside, warm lights in the little Italian place down the street. He looked at me like I was magic, and I believed it. Back then, he opened doors, wrote me notes, made me laugh, so hard I couldn't breathe. I felt seen, valued, safe. When I told my friends I was falling in love with him, they all smiled. "He's a keeper," they said, and I agreed. That version of him, the one I fell for, he felt real. But somewhere along the way, that version disappeared, and in his place came someone I didn't recognize. Someone who could make me feel small without raising his voice. Who could ruin my day with a single look, then hold me at night like nothing happened. But I didn't leave, because I kept waiting for the man I loved to come back. And some days he did. He'd bring me flowers after making me cry. He'd say, "I didn't mean it like that, you're too sensitive." He'd kiss my forehead and tell me I was beautiful right after calling me pathetic. It was confusing, like walking through fog. 1 minute, I thought we were okay. The next, I was apologizing for something I didn't even do. Still I stayed, because I thought it only hurt me. Until that morning. Until that one simple question. "Mommy, does Daddy love you again today?" After she asked me that question, I smiled. Not because I was okay, but because I didn't know what else to do. I smiled the way you do when you're falling apart, but you don't want your child to see. "Of course Daddy loves me today, sweetheart," I said, brushing a crumb off her cheek. She nodded, like that made sense. And then she went back to eating. Just like that. No follow-up. No confusion. As if love was something that came and went, like the weather. I stood up and turned away, so she wouldn't see my face. My hands were shaking as I grabbed a dish towel. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't. Because I had to get her ready for preschool. Because we were already late. Because that's what moms do. We keep moving, even when something inside us is breaking. In the car, she sang along to the radio like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just changed my entire world. And I kept driving with a lump in my throat. I had always told myself that she was too young to understand. That I was shielding her. That whatever happened between me and him stayed between us. But that wasn't true, was it? She saw it all. She saw the way his voice would go flat when he talked to me. She heard the way he sighed like I was a burden. She noticed how I laughed less and apologized more. I thought I was protecting her by staying. But maybe I was teaching her that love looks like this. Hot and cold. Kind, then cruel. A game you can win, or lose depending on the day. What kind of love is that? And more importantly, is that the kind of love I want her to look for when she grows up? That question hit me harder than anything he ever said. Because now, this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about her. Her future. Her heart. Her idea of what's normal. And I was the one showing her what love looks like. That night, after I put her to bed, I sat in the hallway with the lights off. The house was quiet. Too quiet. And I could finally hear my thoughts. I replayed her voice over and over. "Mommy, Does Daddy love you again today? She didn't even say it with fear or sadness. She said it like she was used to it, like love was something earned on good days and withdrawn on bad ones. That broke me in a way I didn't know I could break. Because I used to believe in forever, in loyalty, in working through the hard stuff. But somewhere along the way, working through it turned into walking on eggshells. I don't even remember when it started. Maybe it was the first time he rolled his eyes at something I said, and I laughed it off. Or when he made a joke at my expense in front of his friends, and I told myself he was just playing around. Or maybe it was when he started saying, "You're too sensitive. Don't be dramatic. You're lucky I put up with you." Little things, right? Small enough that I questioned myself more than I questioned him. But the thing about emotional abuse is, it doesn't start with a scream. It starts with a whisper. And those whispers, they sink deep. I started second-guessing every word I said, every look, every choice. I became smaller, quieter, more agreeable. Not because I wanted to, but because it was safer. Because if I didn't speak up, maybe he wouldn't snap. And when he was good, he was so good, he'd say, "I've just been stressed, babe." He'd kiss my forehead and promise he'd be better. And for a day or two, we'd laugh, we'd cuddle, we'd feel like a real family again. And I'd believe him every single time. Because I wanted it to be true. Because I needed it to be true. Until the next shift came. Like weather. Sudden and cold. And then I'd brace for it. But I never thought my daughter noticed. I never thought she had her own version of the weather report. And now I couldn't unhear her question. Couldn't unfeel the truth in it. I was stuck in a storm I kept calling love. And the person holding the umbrella kept letting it slip. The next morning, I looked at myself in the mirror. I barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked tired, not just physically, tired in her soul. Her eyes weren't bright like they used to be. Her shoulders curved inward, like she was trying to disappear. That used to be me. But now, I didn't know who she was. I used to love mornings. Sunlight, coffee, a new day. Now I woke up with a knot in my stomach. Not because of work. Not because of bills. Because I never knew which version of him I was going to get. Was it the sweet, playful man who kissed me on the forehead and called me his everything? Or the cold, distant one who barely looked up from his phone when I spoke? And worse, was I going to tiptoe around him again just to keep the peace? I brushed my hair, put on makeup I didn't care about, made breakfast like everything was normal. And when he came into the kitchen, I smiled. Out of habit. He barely nodded. He grabbed coffee, checked his phone, and muttered something about being late. No, good morning. No kiss. Just silence. And my daughter, she sat there watching both of us, observing, learning. And I realized she was learning that this was love, that this coldness, this distance, this tiptoeing was normal. I wanted to scream, not at him, at myself. Because I stayed. Because I told myself I was doing the right thing by keeping the family together. Because I convinced myself that children need both parents under one roof. But what they really need is peace, safety, warmth, laughter that isn't forced, and love that doesn't leave them guessing. I was giving her a front row seat to a story I never wanted her to believe. One where love meant walking on eggshells. Where being quiet was safer than being honest. Where affection was a reward, not a given. And I realized, if I didn't do something, this cycle would repeat. She'd grow up, find someone who made her feel the same way, and think it was okay, because that's what Mommy taught her. That's what broke me the most. That night, after she went to sleep and the house got quiet, I sat on the bathroom floor. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I just stared at the tiles, and I started to wonder, maybe I was the problem. Maybe I really was too sensitive. Maybe I misunderstood everything. Maybe it was just stress, like he always said. He wasn't hitting me. He wasn't yelling every day. And sometimes, he was still kind. So how could I call it abuse? I'd seen movies, read stories. Abuse looked louder than this. But what do you call it when you're always afraid of saying the wrong thing? When your heart races every time the front door opens? When you stop talking to your friends because it's easier than explaining? What do you call it when you feel lonely? In your own home. It wasn't black and blue. But it was heavy. It made me question myself. All the time. Was I overreacting? Was I imagining it? And yet, every time he walked into the room, I felt myself shrink. That wasn't love. That was survival. But the scariest part? I didn't know how to leave. Where would I go? How would I raise our daughter alone? What if I made things worse? And then came the shame. I was embarrassed. Embarrassed that I had stayed this long. That I had made excuses. That I had told my family he was just stressed from work. I had built a whole illusion around our life. And now I didn't know how to tear it down. Especially without breaking everything. And still, in the middle of all that doubt and fear, her voice echoed in my mind. Mommy, does Daddy love you again today? She didn't say it to hurt me. She said it because she thought that's how love works. That's what finally made me realize, even if I wasn't ready to leave for me, I had to start thinking about her. The next day, I watched her more closely. Not like a mom checking if her child was okay, but like a woman trying to see what she had missed. And I started noticing things. The way she flinched slightly when her dad's tone changed. The way she tried to make jokes to fix the mood when he got cold. The way she hugged me tighter on his bad days, as if trying to protect me with her tiny arms. She was only 5, and she was already learning how to adapt to tension, how to read the room, how to stay small and quiet when things felt unsafe. That's not childhood. That's survival. I realized she was doing what I was doing, only smaller and softer. She mirrored me. She watched how I reacted. She copied how I handled conflict. She even apologized too much, just like I did. Sorry, Mommy, even when she hadn't done anything wrong. I used to think I could hide the bad days from her. But kids don't need words. They feel everything. They hear the silence. They notice the distance. They understand the weight in the room, even if they don't know how to name it. And it hit me all at once. If I stay, I'm not just staying for me. I'm showing her that this is okay, that this is love, that this is what she should expect from her own relationships one day. And I couldn't live with that. Because no matter how scared I was, no matter how uncertain the future felt, I knew I didn't want this for her. Not now. Not ever. That's when the fear started to change. It didn't disappear, but it got quieter. Because something else was growing louder. A quiet voice inside me, one I hadn't heard in a long time. It whispered, you have to protect her, even if it means finally protecting yourself. That night, after she fell asleep, I picked up my phone. Not to scroll, not to distract myself, but to do something I hadn't done in years. I called my sister. When she picked up, I almost hung up. I didn't know what to say. How do you open a conversation like this? But she just said, hey, everything okay? And I broke. Not loud, not messy, just this quiet collapse. I whispered, I think something's wrong. I'm not okay. There was a pause. And then she said, I've been waiting for you to say that. I didn't expect that. She didn't say, I told you so. She didn't ask why I stayed. She just listened. And I talked. For the first time in years, I told someone the truth. Not the filtered version. Not the he's just tired version. The real version. The way he made me feel like I was too much and not enough at the same time. The way I walked on eggshells. The way I disappeared into someone I didn't recognize. I told her about our daughter's question. And I cried. Because that one question, from the one person I thought I was protecting, had undone me completely. And somehow, also saved me. By the end of that call, I wasn't fixed. I wasn't fearless. But I wasn't alone anymore. And that mattered. Because when you've been isolated for so long, connection feels like oxygen. My sister said, I'll help you. Whatever you decide. Just know you don't have to go through this by yourself. And that was the first night in a long time that I slept without feeling like I was drowning. The fear was still there. But so was something else now. A flicker. A beginning. Not of escape, but of awakening. After that phone call, something shifted in me. I didn't wake up fearless, but I woke up different. I had a plan now. A small one. A quiet one. But it was mine. I started doing little things. I opened a private email. I created a folder called Plan B. I looked up rental listings, legal aid, support groups. Every time I clicked on something, my hands shook. Not from guilt, but from fear that he'd find out. Because he had a way of knowing things, of reading moods, of sniffing out secrets. So I smiled like always. I made coffee like always. I laughed at his jokes, even when they weren't funny. But in my mind, I was building a door, a way out, and every step I took, I thought of her, my daughter, my brave, bright, beautiful girl. She deserved mornings without tension, evenings without icy silence, a mother who wasn't pretending. And I deserved to breathe again. But leaving isn't simple. People say, if it's so bad, why don't you just leave? As if it's that easy. As if you're not terrified of starting over, of being alone, of making the wrong decision and dragging your child into a harder life. And then there's the voice in your head that says, what if he's right about you? What if you really are the problem? But here's what I was slowly learning. When you're in a fog long enough, you start to believe it's the weather. You forget there's a world outside it. A world where love isn't earned. Where kindness doesn't come with conditions. Where you don't have to shrink to survive. That world felt so far away. But now, for the first time in years, I believe it might actually exist. And more importantly, I believed I might deserve it. 1 week later, I almost changed my mind. It was a good day. He brought home dinner. He kissed me on the cheek. He helped our daughter with her homework and made her laugh so hard she snorted. And for a few moments, it all felt normal. Safe. He looked at me like he used to. And I looked back, trying to remember if that version of us was real. Or just something I made up in my head to survive the hard parts. Later that night, he sat beside me on the couch. He wrapped his arm around me, and for the first time in a long time, I leaned into it. It felt nice. Too nice. And just like that, the doubt crept in again. What if I was wrong? What if things could be good again? What if he really is trying? I stared at the TV but didn't watch it. I just kept replaying the last few years in my head, trying to measure if the good could ever outweigh the bad. And then, as if the universe didn't want me to forget, our daughter came downstairs, holding her stuffed bunny. "Mommy," she whispered, rubbing her eyes. "It's a good day, right? Daddy loves you today." The same question, the same tone, the same casual acceptance of emotional whiplash. And my heart cracked all over again. Because I realized she wasn't just watching. She was keeping score. She was counting good days, the way I was counting reasons to stay. And I thought, what happens the day she starts asking that question? About herself. Does Mommy love me today? Did I behave good enough today to deserve kindness? No. I couldn't let that happen. This wasn't about me anymore. This was about her blueprint for love, and I was the one drawing it. That night, after she went back to bed, I opened my Plan B folder again. I added 3 new names: women's centers, counselors, legal aid contacts. And I wrote one sentence at the top of the page. I don't need a perfect day. I need a safe life. I didn't slam a door. I didn't pack in the middle of the night. There was no dramatic fight. Just quiet. Because when you've been surviving in silence for years, you learn that peace can be louder than rage. I made a plan. Slow. Careful. I talked to a counselor through a local shelter. I opened a separate bank account. I started setting aside little bits of money, cashback, store returns, birthday cards I never spent. Tiny steps. Barely noticeable. But every dollar felt like a brick. And brick by brick, I was building my way out. I found a short-term apartment. It wasn't much. 1 bedroom. Old carpet. But it was mine. I didn't tell him. Not because I wanted to lie, but because I didn't trust how he'd react. I didn't want a meltdown. I didn't want begging. I didn't want rage disguised as love. I just wanted to leave safely. I waited until he was out of town for work. I told our daughter we were going on a little adventure. Somewhere just for us. She packed her bunny and her favorite book. No questions. No fear. Just trust. And when we left that house, the one with the lovely living room and heavy silence, I didn't cry. Not until we pulled into the parking lot of our new place. She looked up at me and said, "Mommy, is this a good day?" I nodded. I smiled through tears. "No, baby. This is a new day." The first morning in our new place was quiet. Not the heavy kind of quiet, but the soft kind. The kind that feels like a blanket. The sun came through the little kitchen window. Our furniture was still in boxes. Our mattress was on the floor. We ate cereal with plastic spoons. But something felt different. Lighter. I could breathe. No tension walking into the kitchen. No need to scan the room for mood shifts. No invisible weight on my chest. Just me and her. Laughing over spilled milk. She looked happier. Freer. And I realized she had been holding her breath too. We both had. And now, we were finally exhaling. It wasn't perfect. Nothing magical happened. There were still bills. Still fear. Still moments when I wondered, did I do the right thing? But then she said something that will stay with me forever. We were coloring together on the floor. She looked up at me and said, "Mommy, I like when you smile like this. You smile with your eyes now." I didn't even know she noticed the difference. But of course she did. She always noticed. And maybe she always believed I had it in me, even when I didn't. That night, I sat on the floor, holding her close, and I whispered something into her hair I had never said out loud before. I'm proud of us, because we didn't just leave a house. We left a cycle, a pattern, a version of love that was never really love at all. And I finally understood. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose peace, even if your voice still trembles. It's been months now. The boxes are unpacked. Our little place feels like home. It smells like pancakes on Sundays and lavender at night. There are still hard days. Healing isn't a straight line. Sometimes I still flinch at sudden tones. Sometimes I still hear his voice in my head, whispering doubts that don't belong to me anymore. But I'm learning, rebuilding. And she's thriving. She sings louder, sleeps deeper, and no longer asks me if Daddy loves me today. She just knows I'm loved. Because she sees it. In the way I laugh. In the way I dance in the kitchen. In the way I finally love myself. That innocent question she asked that morning. "Mommy, does Daddy love you again today?" It wasn't just a sentence. It was a mirror. It showed me what I had become. And what I didn't want to pass on. Her voice cracked open something I'd kept buried for years. And through that crack, light came in. I'm not sharing this for sympathy. I'm sharing this for someone who's still in the fog. Still asking themselves if they're overreacting. Still making excuses. Still trying to protect their child by staying. Please hear me. They already know. They already feel it. And sometimes, they're just waiting for you to see what they see. You don't have to leave overnight. You don't have to have it all figured out. But you do have to start. Because your peace matters. And your child's future is watching. Now I need to ask you something. Not as a stranger, but as a woman who finally found her voice. If you've ever felt trapped in a situation you know is hurting your child, please don't stay silent. Your words, your advice, your comment below could be exactly the strength I need to finally break free. Help me, because right now, your voice is stronger than mine. Drop a comment, share your story, or just leave a heart.